Hey there, it's Jen for Altenew, and today I wanted to share with you 3 different ways to make background patterns for your projects using 3 different stamp sets. So I wanted to show you a few different ways. One of them uses a stamp set that I would think of for backgrounds that has different shapes on it. One of them is this floral set, Acetate in Watercolor, and this would be great for a background. And then the third one I'm going to use is this indoor garden stamp set, which will be fun, and I'm using that to create a background to go with some specific photos that I have of the botanical gardens in Arizona. So that's where I'm going to start today, and I will talk you through the different things that I'm going to do with each of these stamp sets.
So for this first background, I chose a color scheme, and I just chose colors that I really liked together because I don't have an exact project in mind for this yet. And I think that's a good idea if you're just making a bunch of backgrounds. Just use colors that you use often or that you love together. And I'm going to use the stamp set Acetate in Watercolor. And basically what I'm going to do is choose 5 different floral images, and I'm going to use one color for each image. So I'm using, I think this is Rouge or Coral Bliss. I cannot remember that I'm using for this first floral image, and I'm just going to leave each one on the block where I'm stamping it. I think that's just the easiest way to do this. I could have used a stamp positioning tool, but I felt like for this particular background, it'd just be easier to stamp it by hand. And also, I don't care if the images aren't exactly perfect. That's not what I'm going for here. So it doesn't matter to me if the image isn't completely 100% filled in, or if I mess up the stamping a little bit. I just used an eraser to kind of prep the images. I haven't used all of the ones in this set, so I am just prepping them by using a white eraser on them. So on this type of background, what I like to do is start with one image, and then I kind of nestle as I go. And you can see that pink image fit kind of in that little crook of that more coral colored image, and the blue right next to it. And now I'm going to use this lighter Arctic blue. Oh no, that's lilac or something really light. I can't remember. This last one I'm using is Arctic blue. The products will be linked in the video description as well as over on the blog post if you want to check them out. But I'm just using these 5 colors, and I'm just going to keep stamping them, nestling them together, and making sure that I have kind of an even distribution of the colors. So you can see right where I just stamped that blue image, there was no blue over on that side at all, so that was the perfect place to stamp that. And now I'm going to stamp this large image again, and it kind of fits in that little space there. So there will be spaces between the images, and that's okay. Here it is where I've gone a little bit further. I decided to put a foam mat underneath my stamp area. It just gave me a cleaner image. And like I mentioned, I wasn't too worried about it, but it did help just a little bit, and so I was happy with the images once I stamped it on there. I am using a 12 by 12 background, and in the end, I cut these all down to 6 by 8, so I'll have plenty of this left over to kind of play with when I'm done. And I'm just stamping again, nestling, making sure that the images or that the colors are spread out. And then once I've finished stamping the entire background, making sure that some of the images go off the page, that makes it look like a continuous pattern, I kind of decided that it would be nice to have some sort of color in the background. But before I do that, I wanted to fill in some of the more empty spaces with a little polka dot. And so I just grabbed this little single dot out of the dot art stamp set that I had out to make another background, and I'm using some gray ink to just stamp those down. And I like the playfulness this adds to the pattern, and it also fills in some of those spots. So I'm just kind of making sure that I have the dots kind of all around and filling the spaces that need a little something extra. And I really like the way it adds to the pattern. So that's a super fun pattern. I could have left it like this, but I decided that I wanted a little something more, and I went ahead and added some watercolor to this. And so I'm just grabbing my 36 pan watercolor set, and I'm going to use the light gray color just with a water brush, and I'm just going to go around these images and add some loose color. It's very subtle and very light, but I really am happy with the way that it turned out. And so I'm just going around the images. Because I'm using these dye inks, I don't want to go over the images because it will change the colors. I actually did do that on part of the blue, one of the blue flowers, but it doesn't make too big of a difference. I'll show you closer up here.
Alright, so I finished the watercoloring on half of the paper, and it's very, very subtle. I don't know if you can even really see it, but in real life it has a really gorgeous look. I'll try to get a good photo of it. But for the second half, I thought, since I'm going to cut this paper up anyway, I might as well try two different things. And so for this half, I'm going to try some ink blending. So I'm going to use the same color, Silver Lake, that I used to do the polka dots. I'm just going to use a really light hand and a brush to ink blend this.
So I sped this up quite a lot because it did take a little while. I'm using my Altenew mat behind my layout now, or my background there, to just so I don't get ink all over my mat. My mat's gray, and so it'll be hard for me to see if there's ink on it. And I'm just giving this an overall coat of color, and it kind of makes those flowers look a little vintagey. It fades them out a little bit because I'm not coloring in between the images. I'm just going over the whole thing with the ink. And I'll slow it down here and show you a little bit closer up so that you can see. And I wanted to hold a white cardstock to it so you can see the difference between just the white cardstock and the gray watercolor and gray ink there. So it does add some color to that background. Let's go ahead with our final background. I started with a 6x8 piece of lagoon colored cardstock here, and I'm going to stamp two images. For this entire background, I'm going to use 3 of these cute little plant images. 2 of them are these open outline stamps, and then another one has an open outline base, but the top of it is kind of a filled in leaf. And so I stamped those first 2 images, and I'm going to stamp the third one at the top there. And when you're creating a pattern like this one, a good idea when you have a few images that you want to repeat is to stamp them in triangles. So you can see that I have I started with those first 2 images, and then I stamped the other image kind of in the space between them. And I'm going to continue that all down the page. I will add more details to those other 2 plants, but I have to add the leaves to that third plant ahead of time because they take up so much space. So I'm stamping this one down, and then I will add the base to it, but I decide later it doesn't exactly line up the way that I wanted it to. The pot on the bottom was going to be a little bit crooked, and so from here on out I decide to stamp the base first, and you'll see that here in just a minute. So because the 2 images there are that little squatty circular one and the one with the big flowers, in between those I stamped the cactus, and then in between those 2 I stamped the small squatty plant. So you can see how I'm kind of making that triangular design. I just used those leaves as a guide for where to stamp the base, and it was a good idea to stamp the base first in this case. Now I have to apologize because I pushed stop instead of record on my camera, and so I skipped through the rest even though I meant to come back and show you more. So I've slowed this part down a little bit where I show you the final, the way it finally came out, so slow motion here for you. But I went ahead and stamped the layers that go with each set in coordinating colors. So I used a dark green and then a lagoon that was kind of a tone on tone with the background. And then on the pots, I used some Enchanted gold pigment ink from Altenew, and I also used a bit of a white gel pen to add some details. I am obsessed with how this turned out, so happy with the way that it all came together. All right, for our last background today, I am going to create a simple black and white background pattern. So I've got my Altenew mat out again just to protect my work surface, and I'm going to use permanent black in case I decide later that I want to add color to this, because it works well with alcohol inks and different things like that. And so what I decided to do was to stamp this kind of half circle. It reminded me of a rainbow, but I'm going to stamp a scalloped pattern. So what I'm doing first is just stamping all along the bottom edge of the cardstock, and then I'm going to create, oh, sorry for my head there, I needed to stamp that just a little bit more. I missed a spot, but I'm going to create a scalloped pattern. Before I can do that, I've got to make a mask. I realized this as I was about to stamp that image, and so I have some sticky notes that have a full adhesive back to them, so I just stamp it twice, and I'm going to cut around that circle. If you had a circle die, you could quickly just cut out a circle if you had the same size as this is, but this was easy enough. So I'm just going to cover up 2 of those little half circles at a time so I can stamp the image right above it and in between it to create that scallop. And I think this turns out really cute. I think it would be cute to fill the entire page like this, but I ended up only going about 1/3 of the way down because I wanted to have some breathing room underneath the pattern. So you'll just see as I move those masks along, as I stamp each one, I'm just kind of lining it up in the center and stamping it across, and it gives a really awesome pattern. I can't wait to try more patterns like this. And I'm glad that I have half a sheet of this still to work with. So here's what the final pattern looks like. Again, I just stamped 4 rows. It ended up taking about 1/3 of the page.
So I ended up creating 3 6x8 layouts in total, and I still have a bit of these patterns to play with. So those will be fun for use for future layouts or cards. But I wanted to show you quickly what I did. I wanted to focus this video on the techniques and not on the process of putting the layout together, but they're very simple. So this first one used that first background I created. I ended up using the watercolor portion of it, and I just simply added a little title. I cut it in a piece so that I had a middle just plain white piece, and then that really let the pattern shine on this one. So I'm happy with the way that turned out. The next one is this one, and I ended up cutting down that pattern that I created, and again, I wanted it to have a focal spot on this layout, so I just added a few circles to emphasize that kind of texture of that pattern. I thought about coloring the circles in, but instead decided to add these. But I still have another bit to play with that I can try something else with. And then I cut out some letters using what is this die set? The bold alphabet die, and I watercolored these and added some black splatters to them for that. So that one's just very simple as well. And then this last one is actually going to be a spread, and this one's my favorite. I wanted to keep this pattern full size because I love it so much, and I ended up cutting the word garden out of it, directly out of that base pattern, and then I popped it up. And so I put a piece of white cardstock underneath and just popped up the word garden. So it's very subtle, but you can see it. And I wanted to just keep as much of that pattern as I could. So I thought that was a fun way to do it. And then on the facing page, I just put a bunch of photos and then added a little bit of that same cardstock to tie it together. So very, very simple projects. I hope that you'll try making some patterns of your own. And be sure to head over to the Altenew blog. I'll have it linked in the video description so that you can see more close-ups of these projects.